The cryogenic freezing chambers slowly wake the people up. The emergency defreezing process was initiated due to some unforeseen destruction to the moon base. As the people crawl out of their cryo chambers, looking around to see what had happened, multiple atmosphere bubbles were completely destroyed, rendering them inactive along with the many destroyed cryogenic chambers. Red lines were smoldering within the ground, being left behind from the battle between Zeroy and Psi C. But the most devastating of all was the massive crater that resided right in the middle of the moon base. The people were dazed and confused over what had happened. Regardless, something bad was happening. The scientists rushed over to their observatories to view what was happening back on Zephyr. The island they sent their people to was completely decimated. But what tragedy could have happened to cause all of this? A small, red gleam of light appeared above the moon base. It grew larger and larger until eventually crashed down on the surface of Cyanus. It was Zeroy. Instantly, Zeroy began to fly up, shooting lasers from his arm, destroying everything he laid his eyes on. 3 massive space shuttles appeared above the moon bases, abducting any survivors that attempted to run away. Zeroy wanted to make up for his mistake of letting the species survive, so he began to enact his plan for the fate of Zephian kind. If this species wanted to survive so badly, then he would let them. Zeroy would exterminate a massive majority of the species, while capturing the rest that attempt to run away. These captured people would be transported to a location on the mothership where they would live in constant torture. Zeroy continued its destruction until there was nothing left from the moon base. If the Zephians weren't dead at the hands of Zeroy, then they were seized by the shuttles of the mothership. The moon base rested in shambles as a shell of what it used to be. The ships flew back towards the mothership. It was the last time Zephians would ever see their home again. Zeroy finally initiated his cyanium extraction process, becoming one step closer to the ultimate creation of zeronium, the combination between cyanium and phasium. Cyanium extractors were deployed near the massive deposit of cyanium next to the obliterated moon base. Cyborg-like creatures called phasons resided on the mothership. Oddly enough, they looked very similar to the Zephians, just much more technologically advanced and ran off phasium. Phasons would be the ones performing all the torture onto the Zephians. The abducting shuttles land on the mothership's surface. The people started to get escorted out onto the island that they would be tortured on. This was their fate now. They looked around the island. It was covered in futuristic buildings, but almost none of these buildings seemed to be unlocked to the public. For all the Zephians knew, the buildings didn't even have people in them. Once all the people exited the ships, they lifted off to leave. The ground began to shake, growing more and more vicious every moment. An explosion occurred across the island, shooting liquid phasium into the air. This was the first of many phases of torture planned. The island flooded in several areas. Geysers of phasium bursted out from the ground. The phasium practically dissolved the flesh of the people it came in contact with. Everyone ran for cover and shelter from the disaster. In every disaster would come hope for the people. Yet this time, there was absolutely none. The torture would continue on as the people would continue fighting to survive. Was it even worth the fight if there was no light at the end of the tunnel? Or was the primitive instinct to take cover the only thing keeping the species alive? Suddenly, after days of torment, the island shook. This time, however, it was more subtle of a shake. The phasium ruins across the island started to glow. The shaking slowed to a stop. All survivors on the island suddenly opened their eyes, as if the disaster of phasium geysers was merely a dream. They looked around to see the island return to its original state. All cities were completely reset and back to the pristine state as they once were. But the people knew it was not a dream. Everyone they saw perish was still gone. The phasium geysers really did happen, but the island was somehow reset. The immensely advanced technology of the phasons was beyond comprehension for the Zephians. The island would reset between every phase of torture. The people were relieved for the break of torture, but then came the next phase within minutes of the island resetting. Randomly, around the island spawned small floating bubbles. Each one was different in color from the last, but within seconds, they rapidly expanded, devouring the land within them. The island was scattered with these bubbles of distortion. Once entered in a bubble, one's senses of reality and perception of existence completely distorts. Screams of terror can be heard throughout the island. The distortion wouldn't physically alter anything, but would crumble one's mind faster than imaginable. The experience was indescribable, yet so horrible it would lead to more deaths than the last phase of torture. After gathering over 100 tons of both cyanium and phasium, Zeroi was finally ready to create the ultimate power source. The fusing process required an immense amount of both materials to ensure enough energy was present between both of them to fully fuse. Although there was over 200 pounds of material to only create roughly 5 pounds of zeronium, those 5 pounds would contain more energy than any material ever could from any single dimension. The fusion commenced. Red and blue flashed from the fusion chambers that held the phasium and cyanium. The lights flickered away abruptly. The piles of phasium and cyanium were completely drained of energy, but residing between the two was a purple, cube-like material. Zeroi had finally made zeronium. An entirely new body was constructed for Zeroi. This body was similar to his current one, but was gray and constructed strong enough to contain the power of zeronium. Zeroi was transferred to his new body, and the zeronium was carefully transported from the fusion chamber to the body. Instantly, the zeronium's power cracked across Zeroi's new body. Zeroi stood up, feeling stronger than he had ever felt before through his entire existence. The island rumbled slightly, and the ruins began to glow. The people woke up, seeing the island to be completely reset once again. This time, though, the people were fearful of what stood next. Fear and anticipation filled the minds of the Zephians. Nothing happened. Hours passed, and yet there was no torture, not even a single sign of anything. The island was eerily empty of screams and agony. Something had to be wrong. Why would the torture suddenly stop? The people became more anxious by the minute. Suddenly, the people looked up into the sky. A massive portal ripped through the space-time fabric by the mothership. Blagunski and Zabumski panicked on the bridge of the mothership. Something far more vital was at hand than running torture or anything else. Zeroi's heart sank, for he had never seen any other being travel through dimensions other than him. Something bad was about to happen. A colossal hand reached out of the portal, followed by 3 other hands of the same gargantuan size. The being pulled itself through the portal. It was at least 15 times the size of the island. The entity consisted of a large, rhombus-like body with 2 eyes stacked vertically on it. Floating around this body were 4 massive arms. It was Daimo, the god of gods. For every universe, there is a god to overlook it. But for every god, who is there to overlook them? Daimo was known as a second-tier god. First-tier gods overlooked their universes, while second-tier gods overlooked their gods. Daimo had strange properties about him. Time and space were seemingly irrelevant to him, like he existed in a realm beyond space-time. Daimo is at the pinnacle of existence, existing everywhere at every time, but nowhere at any time. Obviously, this state of being is far past conception for mortals. Daimo uttered his words through the thoughts in Blagunski, Zabumski, and Zeroi's minds. Your existence must be wiped. The one deemed Zeroi has become interdimensionally forbidden due to the material within his being. Zeronium should never exist, as it is composed of 2 of the strongest materials out of their independent dimensions. This composition of being puts the fate of all destiny at risk. Everyone goes quiet. Suddenly, Daimo charges his enormous fist towards the mothership. The ship breaks down, sirens blared across the surface. Blagunski and Zabumski initiate their counterattacks against Daimo. But out of their millennia of existence, neither of them have ever been so fearful for their lives. Rockets and nukes fire towards Daimo, but seem to barely scratch against him. Daimo swipes his hand at the mothership once more, destroying part of it and disabling many systems of the mothership. Many sections of the mothership commenced their emergency escape systems. The island of torture the surviving Zephians were on started to rise slowly. Smoke blasted from below the island as it lifted off into the sky. The rivers of liquid phasium poured dry out of the ends. The massive phasium repository in the center of the island deployed an island-wide energy field to hold an atmosphere as it reached into space. Hundreds of other islands launched off, but many were destroyed by debris or even Daimo himself. Eventually, the Torture Island had now been the sole savior of the Zephian race, all thanks to the automated escape system. With one final blow, Daimo completely shattered the mothership. Before Blagunski and Zabumski could escape, Daimo precisely caught them between his massive fingers and crushed them instantly. The island now floated in space. Some parts were damaged in the escape process, but the majority survived. The people looked around them. Debris from the mothership surrounded them in every direction. All they could do now was to try to quietly escape. The island would automatically search for the nearest habitable location. The island suddenly heads straight for one of Daimo's arms. The system had become damaged from the escape process, thus misinterpreting the massive arm as a place to land. The people could not change the course of the island, no matter what they did. Daimo looked over, seeing his main target, Zeroy. He watched the purple gleam of Zeronium in Zeroy's chest grow larger as he approached him. Zeroy was right in front of Daimo. Zeroy, the god of Treq and Trough, against Daimo, the god of all gods. Daimo could not let Zeroy escape alive. Someone with the destructive and power-hungry mind of Zeroy becoming a second-tier god would mean the end of all reality. The fight between the two forces began. The island headed uncontrollably towards Daimo's arm. Everyone braced for the impact. The energy field was still intact, but the island was broken to pieces. Many Zephians managed to survive the crash, but were now completely deserted on the surface of Daimo's arm. The only chance of hope for the people was to construct escape shuttles out of the materials from the crashed island. The Zephian race could be saved if they managed to escape just once more, even if the odds were slim. Daimo and Zeroy clashed. The massive size of Daimo gave him protection, but Zeroy's newfound Zeronium strength may be the sole factor for his survival. Zeroy relentlessly struck Daimo, zipping around to dodge every blow Daimo tried to make. But each of the strikes Zeroy made to Daimo barely made a dent to him. Zeroy has not been worried about losing a fight in a long time, but this fight was truly terrifying to him. He had always heard rumors of second-tier gods existing, but never saw any evidence for their existence. Apparently, there were only so many dimensions that these second-tier gods had control over, although this exact number is unknown. Daimo would rarely land a punch on Zeroy, but when he did, it was absolutely devastating for Zeroy. Zeroy would become disoriented, leaving him vulnerable for even more hits against him. He suspected that he could only go through so many of Daimo's strikes before he would perish, even with his Zeronium abilities. But with enough hits from Zeroy, Daimo would slowly but surely weaken. A matter of time would be the decider of the two's fate. Almost 2 long years of fighting went on between Daimo and Zeroy. Daimo had many chunks cracked from his body. Zeroy's body was heavily dented. Neither of the both had ever been this weak and injured before, but their motives upheld them enough to continue fighting. Daimo fought for the sake of his position over all his dimensions, something he had strived so hard to attain. Zeroy fought so that the centuries of effort he put in would not go to waste. The both were debilitated, but the fortitude of their minds sustained them. The ruins of the island on Daimo's arm were partially recycled to construct small cities for the Zephians to live in. Not only this, but the materials harvested from the crashed pieces of the island also allowed for the people to start construction on escape shuttles. The hope for a better life afar filled the people with determination. They only needed a little longer to finish construction of the shuttles. Suddenly, Daimo becomes infuriated. For almost 2 years straight, the two had been fighting non-stop. Daimo began to go all out against Zeroy. Zeroy was too weak to dodge every strike, only being able to avoid roughly half of the blows. Daimo kept attacking, throwing punches faster and faster. Zeroy couldn't keep up against Daimo. Zeroy's armor cracked so much that it would chip off in places. Zeroy was exhausted. Daimo was throwing the strongest and fastest punch yet, right as Zeroy. Suddenly, Zeroy charged his punch with the Zeronium energy within him and struck back at Daimo's fist. Zeroy's robotic hand he struck with was completely obliterated from the attack, but as a result, Daimo's fist was completely shattered. The damage cracked down the rest of Daimo's arm. Daimo's eyes widened with shock. Zeroy charged up the stump of his missing hand with Zeronium energy, blasting uncontrolled beams of energy at Daimo. Daimo was going to die. Without a doubt in his mind, he knew if he wanted to live, he would have to run. Although Zeroy was almost as damaged as him, he was dead set on winning this fight. Daimo quickly began to rip open a portal to a different dimension, rushing into it before Zeroy could follow him. Zeroy notices Daimo's attempt to escape and charges straight towards him. A blinding flash appears.